it was with a very melancholy laugh that Newman Noggs concluded this soliloquy, and it was with a very melancholy shake of the head and a very rueful countenance that he turned about and went plodding on his way. This, under ordinary circumstances, would have been to some small tavern or dram shop, that being his way in more senses than one. But Newman was too much interested and too anxious to betake himself even to this resource, and so, with many desponding and dismal reflections, went straight home. It had come to pass that afternoon that Miss Morleena Kenwigs had received an invitation to repair next day per steamer from Westminster Bridge unto the Ale Pie Island at Twickenham, there to make merry upon a cold collation, bottled beer, shrub and shrimps, and to dance in the open air to the music of a locomotive band, conveyed thither for the purpose, the steamer being specially engaged by a dancing master of extensive connection for the accommodation of his numerous pupils, and the pupils displaying their appreciation of the dancing master's services by purchasing themselves and inducing their friends to do the like, divers light blue tickets, entitling them to join the expedition. Of these light blue tickets, one had been presented by an ambitious neighbour to Miss Morleena Kenwigs, with an invitation to join her daughters, and Mrs. Kenwigs, rightly deeming that the honour of the family was involved in Miss Morleena's making the most splendid appearance possible on so short a notice, and testifying to the dancing master that there were other dancing masters beside him, and to all fathers and mothers present that other people's children could learn to be genteel beside theirs, had fainted away twice under the magnitude of her preparations, but upheld by a determination to sustain the family name or perish in the attempt, was still hard at work when Newman Noggs came home. Now, between the Italian ironing of frills, the flouncing of trousers, the trimming of frocks, the faintings and the comings to again, incidental to the occasion, Mrs. Kenwigs had been so entirely occupied that she had not observed until within an hour before that the flaxen tails of Miss Morleena's hair were in a manner run to seed, and that unless she were put under the hands of a skilful hairdresser, she never could achieve that signal triumph over the daughters of all other people, anything less than which would be tantamount to defeat. This discovery drove Mrs. Kenwigs to despair, for the hairdresser lived 3 streets and 8 dangerous crossings off. Morleena could not be trusted to go there alone, even if such a proceeding were strictly proper, of which Mrs. Kenwigs had her doubts. Mr. Kenwigs had not returned from business, and there was nobody to take her. So Mrs. Kenwigs first slapped Miss Kenwigs for being the cause of her vexation, and then shed tears. "You ungrateful child," said Mrs. Kenwigs, "after I have gone through what I have this night, for your good." "I can't help it, ma," replied Morleena, also in tears. "My hair will grow." "Don't talk to me, you naughty thing," said Mrs. Kenwigs. "Don't. Even if I was to trust you by yourself, and you were to escape being run over, I know you'd run into Laura Chopkins, who was the daughter of the ambitious neighbour, and tell her what you are going to wear tomorrow. I know you would. You've no proper pride in yourself, and are not to be trusted out of sight for an instant." Deploring the evil-mindedness of her eldest daughter in these terms, Mrs. Kenwigs distilled fresh drops of vexation from her eyes, and declared that she did believe There never was anybody so tried as she was. Thereupon, Morlina Kenwigs wept afresh, and they bemoaned themselves together. Matters were at this point, as Newman Noggs was heard to limp past the door on his way upstairs, when Mrs. Kenwigs, gaining new hope from the sound of his footsteps, hastily removed from her countenance as many traces of her late emotion as were effaceable on so short a notice, and presenting herself before him, and representing the dilemma, entreated that he would escort Morlina to the hairdresser's shop. "I wouldn't ask you, Mr. Noggs," said Mrs. Kenwigs, "if I didn't know what a good, kind-hearted creature you are. No, not for worlds. I am a weak constitution, Mr. Noggs, but my spirit would no more let me ask a favour where I thought there was a chance of its being refused, than it would let me submit to see my children trampled down and trod upon by envy and lowness." Newman was too good-natured not to have consented, even without this avowal of confidence on the part of Mrs. Kenwigs. Accordingly, a very few minutes had elapsed when he and Miss Morlina were on their way to the hairdresser's. It was not exactly a hairdresser's. That is to say, people of a coarse and vulgar turn of mind might have called it a barber's, for they not only cut and curled ladies elegantly, and children carefully, but shaved gentlemen easily. Still, it was a highly genteel establishment, quite first rate in fact, and there were displayed in the window, besides other elegancies, waxen busts of a light lady and a dark gentleman, which were the admiration of the whole neighbourhood. Indeed, some ladies had gone so far as to assert that the dark gentleman was actually a portrait of the spirited young proprietor, and the great similarity between their headdresses. Both wore very glossy hair, with a narrow walk straight down the middle, and a profusion of flat circular curls on both sides, encouraged the idea. The better informed among the sex, however, made light of this assertion, for however willing they were, and they were very willing, to do full justice to the handsome face and figure of the proprietor, they held the countenance of the dark gentleman in the window to be an exquisite and abstract idea of masculine beauty, realized sometimes, perhaps, among angels and military men, but very rarely embodied to gladden the eyes of mortals. It was to this establishment that Newman Noggs led Miss Kenwigs in safety. The proprietor, knowing that Miss Kenwigs had 3 sisters, each with 2 flaxen tails, and all good for 6 pence apiece, once a month at least, promptly deserted an old gentleman whom he had just lattered for shaving, and handing him over to the journeyman, who was not very popular among the ladies by reason of his obesity and middle age, waited on the young lady himself. Just as this change had been effected, there presented himself for shaving a big, burly, good-humoured coal-heaver with a pipe in his mouth, who, drawing his hand across his chin, requested to know when a shaver would be disengaged. The journeyman, to whom this question was put, looked doubtfully at the young proprietor, and the young proprietor looked scornfully at the coal-heaver, observing at the same time, "You won't get shaved here, my man." "Why not?" said the coal-heaver. "We don't shave gentlemen in your line," remarked the young proprietor. "Why, I see you a shaving of a baker, when I was a looking through the window last week," said the coal-heaver. "It's necessary to draw the line somewheres, my fine feller," replied the principal. "We draw the line there. We can't go beyond bakers. If we was to get any lower than bakers, our customers would desert us.